Welcome back to episode 56 of the Run Fast podcast. Today I'm joined by Brady Holmer. Brady's a 2:37 marathon runner, science researcher, and self-described performance geek. We get into Brady's training plan to break 2:30 for the marathon and lots more. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Brady, welcome. We were just chatting quickly off air, so we can just jump straight into things. First of all, I suppose, thanks for joining me. And just quickly, if you can just give us a little bit of background on what you do, what you currently do for work, and what your sort of your sporting background is.
Sure thing. First of all, thanks a lot, Rod, for having me on. I think this will be a fun discussion wherever it happens to take us. I know we have a lot of topics planned to talk about. So, let's see. We'll start with maybe my sporting athletic background, and then I can talk about what I do now in terms of sporting and athletics and my full time job. So, I am a big time endurance athlete. I always have been. Started running when I was about, I would say, 12 or 13. And when I say running, I mean started seriously running. I did like 1.5 mile runs before then in gym class every year when we would do that. And oddly enough, I was pretty good at those. Pretty good at those 1.5 mile runs, and that kind of got me into the sport. But I've been a lifelong endurance athlete and ran in high school, ran in college, continue to run what I'd call recreationally. I mean, I would like to think I'm better than your average recreational runner, but I'm by
I'm
no
sure
means a
you are.
pro. I'm by no means a pro or at like an elite level of running. So just always been an endurance runner my entire life, and I majored in exercise science in college. Naturally, I feel like endurance runners and gym bros, as we'll call them, tend to kind of merge into that exercise science field. So I got my bachelor's of science in exercise science. I went to graduate school and received my master's in human performance, which is sort of an offshoot of exercise science, I would say, focusing a little bit more on the practical aspects. But I got a vast, education in human physiology. I was in a cardiovascular physiology lab, so that's kind of what I'm classically trained in, is cardiovascular physiology, the effects of endurance training on the heart, on the blood vessels, things like that. Just studied a bunch of things in grad school and really got me interested in not only the process of doing science, but also sort of writing about science and just all these different topics. Like I specialized in, exercise physiology and the heart and cardiovascular physiology. But throughout grad school, I got this huge interest in like, oh, I just kind of want to explore all these topics. I'm very interested in nutrition. I'm very interested in endurance exercise, very interested in things like intermittent fasting and things like that. So I started blogging, started writing about it, and that sort of transitioned into what I do today, which is write about science on my Substack. I have a full-time job where I research and write about science and help produce science-related content. So really just love like finding out new things about whether it's mostly endurance running, but nutrition and things like that, writing about it, making it practically applicable for people, and just sharing science. I found a lot of joy in that, and interacting with people like you on social media has helped to kind of reignite the joy for that, and I'm learning a ton. So that's kind of a brief story of like who I am and what I do, but we could maybe go into details on some of those things.
Yeah, the social media thing's interesting today, right? It's and I like Twitter for that particular reason, where it's more of written content and you just connect with different people, and it probably in some situations it does go down a bit of a crazy path, and there's always a little bit of controversy out there. But overall, I think there's some good conversations to be had out there. When you say you started running more seriously around 12, I don't fully understand the American. Obviously, I'm in Australia, and our careers, depending where you grow up, playing sport, you typically go into the base Australian sports. I grew up in Melbourne. We only have the two big cities here, Melbourne and Sydney. And if you're in Sydney or New South Wales, you typically go off and play what we call rugby. And if you're in Melbourne, you play Australian rules football. So I would run on the side, but you always get pushed into Aussie rules. And if you can run a bit better, you definitely get pushed into those sports. So when you say you started to run when you were 12, is it really popular at school there? Like, is it something that I hear a lot about the cross country sort of scene in the US is quite big?
I would say it's big. I wouldn't say by no means is it popular, I guess. I mean, track and field and cross country are still very, depending on where you live in the United States, I feel like they're still pretty niche sports. I mean, it's not what you traditionally think of like when you're a kid. Oh, you want to play one of the major ball sports, which is going to be like baseball or soccer. I never played football. Wasn't built for it. I just never really had an interest in it. But that's obviously a huge one of the most popular sports in America. Or like golf or tennis or something like that. Those are the sports that you play as a kid. You don't necessarily focus on running. But cross country is somewhat popular, and so is track and field. But when I started at basically when you turn 12, 13, or whatever at that age, you're in junior high school, and so you can start officially like playing sports for the school that you're in. And the school offered cross country, and I still was a big basketball player. But like I said, when I was in elementary school and things like that, I would do these races every year, like one race a year, and I would do pretty well in it. Like there was this 1.5 mile run that was held every year. I would run in that. I would typically get like third, first, or second place. So kind of showed that I had like this natural talent in running. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to go out for cross country when I get into middle school. So I started that, but that was more kind of like conditioning for basketball. I was just really into basketball. Thought that I would like, play basketball in college and go to the NBA. I never grew past 5'11", so obviously, like I think it's good that I transitioned into running and didn't keep with basketball. As you can see, I'm not exactly built for basketball, but so I started running cross country in junior high, and again, kind of conditioning for basketball. But then when I was in eighth grade, so junior middle school is seventh and eighth grade. I was in eighth grade cross country season. I won every single race that cross country season. Same thing with track. We did the mile run, which was the longest distance. I won every single mile run that I did. And so kind of after that year, I was like, all right, basketball is maybe going to like go to the wayside and I'm going to like try to do this running thing full time. So that was kind of when I started to get serious about it and like really just set my mind to training. We're going to actually run and then, go to high school. And that's kind of all I focused on throughout high school, which was cross country and track and field. So I would say I was pretty serious about it from a young-ish age. I mean, there are certainly kids who start much younger, um, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10. In a way, I'm kind of thankful that I didn't start that young. I mean, you can certainly be good and continue to be good a long time if you start that early, but I think for me, starting later was a little bit of an advantage. It just like you can burn out sometimes if you start too early in sport, and given I think my tendencies to just go all into like anything that I'm doing. I think that I may have had that tendency. I certainly did when I then started training seriously. But I'm kind of glad that my parents never really like pushed me into running per se at a young age. It was kind of just like this exploratory in sports, which I think all kids sort of need. I mean, I want my son to be like a runner. We currently have like a 17-month old, and I want him to run. But when he's 5 years old, I'm certainly not going to be out training him to run like road races. Hopefully, I think they deserve a little bit more flexibility at that age.
Yeah. And I agree with I mean, obviously, a couple of things there. We naturally progress into those sports that we excel at or get better at quite quickly. Everyone likes the accolades and the feeling of winning things. So I think that's the path we naturally take. I always preferred running, but I was a better footballer. So I just kept going towards the football space. And the moment I got a bit old and stopped playing football, I went back to track, even though I wasn't great at it, but I had so much of a passion for it. But it's I think the diversity in sports growing up is really important. And the burnout thing, I think, is a classic as well. I think you can start so many sports too young. And again, in Australia, I mean, I started playing Aussie rules when I was 5. And by the time I was 16, I'd played so many games, I actually had to take a break. And I ruined my career because I was at that prime where, I was ready to go to the next level and I just needed some time out. So I think that's a really good point as well.
Yeah, kind of peaked a little too early, maybe.
Yeah, and you're right. I think in some situations, parents need to hold you back, but a lot of kids, they start to excel. Their parents get excited about how good they're going, so they push them even more. And then all of a sudden, the kid, you can obviously go either way. You can either burn out or continue on like some of these great athletes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's hard. I mean, like you said, if you have a child who's very, very talented, and this could be for running or this could be for any sport, it's like, yeah, I can imagine a situation where my son like starts to be really good at running when he's 6, and you're like, oh, let's just put him in all these races and train him really hard. And I think it requires a little bit of self control as like a parent, and hopefully like some knowledge that I hope that I would have to just say, hey, let's, they're good, but they're not going to get worse as long as you just kind of like, you need to nurture this talent instead of just like, what can we do as quick as possible to make you as good as possible? And then, if they don't make it past college, then, what was the point of it all? That's kind of
Yes.
my perspective. And I've seen that happen to a lot of athletes. Luckily, I wasn't so good that happened to me. I mean, I was a decent high school runner, decent enough to like go run Division 1 in college, but I wasn't a freak like athlete where I was competing in national championships or anything. And I think, it served me better for the longevity in the sport, I think.
So going through that period of your life when you were started to run quite well, do you have a coach at school, or do you have an external coach? What's the coaching situation there?
Yeah, you just get the coach that is in at the school. So there are like typically one head coach, a couple assistant coaches at the school. In junior high, I had an incredible coach, luckily, who like really I think fostered like a love in the sport, and was a hard coach, but again, just was like he knew how to coach the age at which he was coaching. So I was lucky enough to have a great coach in junior high, and then good coaches in high school too. But like the junior high coach was really one who I remember as just being really got me into the sport and like kind of taught me about running and not just like run as hard as you can, but really like, oh, let's like develop this talent, learn how to do it. So yeah, I didn't have like any outsource like a coach during the summer. I guess there are some kids who do that, but that was never a route I took. It was just the coaches at the high school were the ones who I had coach me.
Yeah, I think it's really important, isn't it, that you can just get lucky where you have a passionate teacher at school. And I was the same. I
Mm-hmm.
was fortunate. I had one passionate teacher when I was in secondary school in Australia for football, but externally I used to have track as well. And I was very lucky. I had an ex-Olympic coach out of Ireland that moved to Australia, and he was much older at the time, and he just loved the sport of track and field and just took so much time with their athletes. And I think the one thing I've always said to a lot of people was the great thing about track and field, you learn running drills very early. And those drills, you never lose that running technique your entire life. I mean, I switch back to a bit of endurance running, and my natural running technique just comes, just flows straight away. And people have always said, oh, God, you run so well. And I'm still certain, and it's learning those running drills when I was very young. And I know as an adult, and I started coach when I was an adult and masters athletes, trying to teach some of these guys drills, like the technical drills as adults, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the younger ages are when you really want to teach those drills because there's, so much like neuroplasticity going on. Not that you can't teach that stuff at an older age, but like you said, once you get to 30, 40, 50, those movement patterns that you've established over the last 30 to 40 years are so ingrained that it's very hard to like change somebody's running form or whatever without risking injury. So yeah, I think when you're young, especially with sprinters and kids like that in track and field, doing drills like that super beneficial. And yeah, it just there's this idea of like muscle memory that people are like, oh, that doesn't really, but like I think it exists. I mean, you with strength training and just with repetition of drills, I think you get that muscle memory where yeah, if you did that stuff at age 5 and or age 10, like it's gonna stick with you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I don't know the science around muscle memory, but just from a personal point of view, I definitely believe it. In things like I was quite strong. I'm not a big person either, but I was quite strong at bench press. I could have these extended periods of time off, and I could get back to benching quite heavy weights very, very quickly. Where other, forms of heavy weightlifting and stuff, I couldn't get back as quick. But I'm certain there's some really good muscle memory there for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously we don't need to go deep into the science there, but I will just mention that there was like they did publish some studies showing stuff about muscle memory where actually so like whenever you do endurance training or resistance training, your muscle you don't may not actually get like more muscle fibers, but your myonuclei or the muscle fibers that you have, they get, like bigger or you may get more myonuclei. And they actually show that so if you train, you get more of those. If you detrain, you keep those myonuclei, but they get smaller or get to like this senescent state. And then when you train again, they come back. So that's kind of like the muscle memory. Your muscles literally have something in them that you've built up that, oh, you used to be an athlete 20 years ago. You still have some of those things that linger on so that when you start training again, it just comes back so quick. So,
Interesting.
there's definitely some science to that. It's not, I'm not a muscle biologist, but yeah, that's kind of the basis of it.
So based on that theory, does that also apply to the heart?
Yeah, I think it would as well. Like endurance athletes who, yeah, if you train your heart up as an endurance athlete and then kind of take some time off, I would posit that, if somebody took 20, 30 years off of endurance running and they used to be a runner, there would still be some sort of those adaptations that you would still see there for sure.
Sure,
Like
sure.
VO2 max, I mean, same thing. Like if you have a guy who's got a big VO2 max, a guy or girl who's got a big VO2 max, you're always going to have that, like, regardless of if you take 20 to 30 years off, you're still going to have a higher VO2 max than like 98% of the population, probably.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Whilst we're on the topic of VO2 max, I know that it's a bit of a passion of yours, and you've also written about VO2 max. I do have a copy of your book. I've read part of it. I haven't read it all the
Oh,
way
great.
through. So
Thanks.
yeah, it's good reading. And it's not something I know a lot about the science of VO2 max, but it gets bandied around a lot today. Just for the average person out there, what is considered a good VO2 max for a regular age? I think you're around your 30 or early 30s. What is a high VO2 max for someone your age? What's kind of on the low side, and what's sort of that in between sort of space?
Yeah. So I would
Well,
say
first of all, what's
males.
your VO2 max?
Yeah. So I've had, I think, 3 or 4 tests throughout my life. They've all been between 75 and 80. So it's somewhere around in that range. It was funny. I had actually posted something a while back, but I had a VO2 max test done when I was 13 or no, 16 years old, because I had like passed out during a race. And they wanted to check to see if I had any heart conditions or anything like that. So I had a stress test at like the local hospital, and I like messaged somebody there because I was curious. I was like, do you still have the records of these? Like when I did it, and they sent it back to me, and I think it was 76 when I was 16 years old or something like that. So,
Wow.
and that kind of just goes to show yeah, like endurance sports like choose you sometimes, other than you choosing
Mm-hmm.
endurance sports. It's like with a 76 VO2 max at age 16, I'd only been running for a few years. So, I mean, my VO2 max didn't go from 40 to 75 in 2 years. It was like, you have a high VO2 max, I think there's certainly a genetic component to it. So, anyway, I digress. So the VO2 max range for somebody like, males 25 to 35, a good score, I call it a score. It's not really a score, but like a good VO2 max is going to be somewhere between like 45 and 55. I would say that puts you in the average to above average. You kind of don't necessarily want to be average. You maybe want to be a little above average. And if there are women listening to this as well, you can typically just subtract about 5 from
Mm-hmm.
anything that I say for like a reference range for a male. And that's probably what yours should be. So a female, 40 to 50 for a similar age. So again, that's for like younger males, say around age 30, 45 at the lower end, 55 at the higher end. Once you get above 55 to 60, that's kind of in your very, very good range. So 55 to 65 would be a pretty stellar superior VO2 max. And then 65 and above, those are typically the values that you're going to see in like a endurance athlete. Anything below 45, and certainly below anything below 40 for a male is going to be pretty low, again, unless you're 60, 70, or 80, something like that. I think even if you're 50 or 60, having a VO2 max of 50 to 55 is probably important as a male. Similarly for a female, something around there. Because once we can maybe talk about the importance of it with aging and stuff, but those are kind of, again, those are just kind of the ranges. So, and I said the ranges for like healthy adults my age, but for someone, I know you said you're 50 now, in your
Mm-hmm. In
50s.
my 50s.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a guy on social media, Alan Cousins, who says like at age
Mm-hmm.
50 you should strive to like have a 50 VO2 max. I think that's a great goal. Depends, if you have a history of endurance running, there's no reason why it probably couldn't be higher. But all this, will depend on your baseline VO2 max, kind of where it was in your 40s, how much you've trained. So those are kind of good goals to shoot for. I like the 50 at 50 number that he kind of proposed. I don't know if there's really any evidence to back it up, but it's certainly a great number to shoot for.
Just sounds good though.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to remember too.
Yeah, 100%.
Uh-huh.
Just around that though, so just for listeners, what's extremely high for VO2 max? What's the highest recorded VO2 max that we know about?
There's a lot of controversy around that one actually, because there's a triathlete, Christian Blumenfeld,
Mm-hmm.
who apparently recently got a VO2 max score of 100, supposedly, and I think they've probably validated it a couple times. But even let's throw that one out. I know that there have been a couple also recorded in the mid 90s from like these Norwegian cross country skier guys. Those guys typically have the highest VO2 maxes. So mid to low 90s, several of those. So I would say like mid 90s, the highest ever recorded. For women, I think the highest that I've ever seen is somewhere around, and by say I've ever seen, which is just like seen reported in like the literature, would be like a 78, I think, to 80. Joan Benoit Samuelson, the marathon runner, I know she has like one of the highest that they've ever seen. So somewhere around 80 for females then is like the highest that have been recorded. That 100 number though is like scary if it's true, that because that's absolutely insane.
Yeah, those guys have got some crazy numbers being pushed out though.
Yeah.
I've listened to a lot of their podcasts and followed them a little bit. My God, some of the data they're pushing out is just nuts. But I have read about many years ago when I used to follow a little bit more sort of closer to the sports, but the cross country skiers, and everybody forgets about cross country skiers if they're in more traditional sports and if you don't really know about those places, but they are super fit guys, like
And
crazy fit.
it's because it's a whole body exercise. So if you think about running or cycling, running you're using your arms but you're not really using your arms.
Mm-hmm.
Cycling you're just using your legs, and obviously your legs have the most muscle mass, the largest muscle mass in your body. So if you're doing leg exercise, you can really have a very high oxygen consumption. But then if you think about cross country skiing, you're using your legs. These guys have massive just legs. Then you're using your arms because you're pulling for the cross country
Mm-hmm.
skiing. So they have huge arms as well. So I mean, just you're engaging so much more muscle during that the VO2 that you're going to be able to, the oxygen uptake that you're going to be able to achieve is just going to be so high. I mean, I honestly think that if you were to take myself or take like a really good triathlete and actually train them to be able to kind of cross country ski, like train them to the form pretty well, and then like have me do a VO2 max test where I'm cross country skiing, I could probably bump my score up by like 5 to 8 mLs per kg because I'm engaging my arms as well. Just a
Yes.
theory, I guess there, but it's that whole body nature of that sport. I think that lends
And
itself to just being
not
incredibly.
not to mention all the training's done at very high altitude as well, right?
Yeah, that'll help as
So
well.
yeah.
Yep.
um, just as an example, do you recall what Lance Armstrong's VO2 max was at his peak of his career?
Yeah, I think high 80s probably.
Yeah, okay.
88, maybe even 90, I think that he recorded. And everybody will say, "Oh, well, he was on like drugs and stuff." It's like, well, that he still had that high of a VO2 max, and so I think he was naturally good from a young age as well. If you look back, even before he started using drugs, I'm no big fan of the guy, but even at age 16, he was like national caliber. So, yeah, I think he's got a VO2 max in the high 80s, low 90s, or at least he did at his peak.
Yeah, 100%. I've still seen him, performing in some events, even in his early 50s
Hmm.
now, and he can still go out and run some pretty phenomenal times.
For
And
sure.
he just rode the Leadville 100 the other week, just as a support for a friend of his, though. So and that's a tough race. I've done the 50 on a mountain bike. That's with very little training as a sprint-based athlete. That was a very tough race. That was 7 hours out in the saddle and turned me inside out. Talking about the VO2 max, I have a couple of questions around that. How difficult is it to improve your VO2 max, and how long does it take? How long would it take the average person to bump their VO2 max? And how accurate do you think watch recordings are on like a Garmin device today?
Yeah, in terms of how long, I guess I'll start there. Like, how long does it take to improve your VO2 max? That will all of what I'm going to say, I guess, is going to depend on what's your baseline fitness status. How long have you been training? What types of training are you going to do? In general, though, I think most people could expect to see an improvement between 6 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks minimum, I would say, to see improvements in VO2 max. Um, that will depend on the type of training you're doing. If you're doing predominantly, say, like longer, just lower intensity zone 2 work, or like high intensity interval training, but just drawing on, say, like, what do we know from the studies in terms of how long it takes? 6 to 8 weeks, I say, would be a reasonable, that would still be fairly quick, but you could certainly see improvements in VO2 max during that time. Let's just assume then somebody's doing a mix of HIIT, high intensity interval training, and endurance training, which most programs, in my opinion, should include a little bit of both of those. I would say you could probably in that time expect to see an improvement of 5 mLs per kg in VO2 max, like in relative VO2 max. Maybe 10, I think. That wouldn't be, if you started with a lower VO2 max, you could see like an increase of 10. And again, that's in 6 to 8 weeks. So that's a very short-term improvement. Most people, you want to be able to maintain that for longer. You want to increase it more. So say you train for 6 months to a year, I don't think there's a reason why you couldn't see a 10 to 20 mLs per kg increase in that. Again, just finding a sustainable routine that has some endurance training and high intensity interval training in there. You can certainly increase your VO2 max by that much. Again, that will depend on your baseline. I mean, at this point in my life, I'm not going to see massive increase in my VO2 max with training. If anything, I don't train my VO2 max because it's already, I think, as high as it needs to be. I need to focus on other things. But if you're someone who has an average, so say you're sitting at 45 and you say, oh, I want to increase to 55, I think that's possible with, probably more than 8 weeks of training, because that's still a pretty high VO2 max to start with. But, 1 to 2 years of dedicated endurance training could certainly get you there.
And when you say one over that 8-week period, what would somebody have to do to increase their VO2 max by, let's say, 5 over that period of time? Is someone still going to see an increase by just doing simple, zone 2 or zone 3 training, or do they really need those bumps in training when they are doing that really heavy interval work?
Yeah, interval work. I mean, again, if you take somebody who's very untrained, they've never done any cardiovascular exercise in their life, you could increase your VO2 max by 5 to 10 just by doing zone 2 exercise training.
Yeah.
But so for the sake of the conversation, let's just say we're talking about somebody who has a decent experience. They exercise a couple of days per week, but they want to increase their training to increase their VO2 max a little bit more. I would say, do 2 to 3 zone 2 training sessions per week, and then 1, maybe 2 high intensity interval sessions per week. If you're looking, say, for a faster increase, like in your, I don't know why anyone would just say, oh, I just want to improve my VO2 max in 8 weeks and then not do anything. Because say, like, I just want to do a research study on myself. Then I would say, do HIIT twice a week and then do zone 2 or like lower intensity training twice a week. But for most people, I think 1 session of high intensity training per week is certainly sufficient. Complement that with 3 moderate intensity endurance training sessions, and that should do it. I really do think that there's a very, very important role of intensity there. So I would recommend, to say that you can't improve your VO2 max with quote unquote zone 2 training, I think is false. I mean, you certainly can. It's not going to be anywhere near what you could do with high intensity interval training. And so intensity is a necessary, I think, component of if you actually are actively wanting to target your VO2 max. There are obviously benefits that extend beyond just VO2 max, but that's definitely a necessary component, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's so true and it goes across any sport. I even know with, running track for so long, you can get away with improving your baseline if you're coming off a very low baseline with very standard training sessions. But the moment you actually start to improve and become, somewhat better, you have to actually have more specific sessions to actually start improving, your speed or your speed endurance and so forth. Let's just go back and talk about, I think are you training for a marathon at the moment? Is that correct?
I am, yeah. I little less than 2 months now. So on first week of November, I'll be running a marathon, which will only be my 3rd marathon ever.
Okay. So you've already run a couple of marathons. What's your current marathon times? What have you run for your previous marathons?
I kind of only say I've run 1 marathon. The first one that I ran, I had signed up for it. Was very undertrained for it. I had like a stress fracture when I was training for it. It wasn't like a very severe one, so I could run through it, but just wasn't even really I just kind of went into the race just wanting to finish it. So we'll say I've done 1 marathon, and my PR is a 2:37.
Oh,
and I ran, and that was from this May.
Oh wow, that's a good run, very good run.
Yeah, I
Have
was
you?
happy with it. The goal for the next one is going to be to go under 228, so I'll hope to improve by like over 10 minutes, which I think is possible. I've done a lot of different things with training this go around. One of the focuses for me with my endurance training lately has just been like get to the starting line healthy. I've just had lots of setbacks over the past 5 years that have like prevented me from racing very much, and so I kind of decided to myself like I would rather be maybe a little bit undertrained, run a little bit less than I think I can, and healthy versus pushing kind of the limits and just ending up injured before every race happens. So for May, that was kind of my goal. I was coming off of a half marathon that I had run in January, and I was just like, let's kind of run maybe half the mileage that I think I probably could, bike a lot, and just see what I can run off of this amount of mileage. That experiment or whatever you want to call it went pretty well, but this time around, I've almost doubled my running mileage from there, doing some more specific workouts. So I'm hoping to improve upon that time, hopefully by at least 10 minutes and maybe even more. The course I ran that on was pretty tough, over 1,000 feet of elevation gain. So it was by no means like a flat pancake course.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's a pretty mature thing to say about just getting to the start line sometimes. Definitely as you become an older athlete, and I mentioned before, I ran into my late 40s as a competitive track runner, running 400 still. And I didn't have great times. I ran a 52.1 at 42.
Wow.
It sort of kind of ranked me, and I
Mhm.
was up there in the Masters athletes. But the biggest thing became getting to the start line. And my track coach was a big advocate as there's so many people that might be better than you at our age in particular, but they
Mhm.
never get to the start line. They just continuously break down. So if you got to the start line, majority of the time, if you could run okay, you would always medal. Because so many athletes, and particularly at national or international events, we had to go through the rounds. Over the course of 2 or 3 days, so many athletes would just disappear because they just couldn't keep going through the rounds. And the one thing about our running squad, we were very well conditioned to run the
Mhm.
rounds. So it's a really interesting thing that you say that, sometimes we can have these big target times, but getting to the start line on the day is the biggest thing, particularly for sports like marathon running where you're putting those sort of miles in. Um,
Absolutely. And I mean, I can imagine for someone like you who's competing in the masters division, and if you continue to compete and like, and I'm thinking about this for myself as I eventually get into the masters category and beyond, but like at that point it's kind of like, man, if you can just stay conditioned and stay healthy and like out, not literally out survive these people, but out survive them in terms of athletic longevity, you're going to be an elite in the elite category, when you're 50 or 60, because everybody else is just fallen out of the, they're out of the bucket now, and like you're the only one there. So if you're
yeah,
one of the few who are still there competing and like strong, that's like a huge advantage. I'm in like the worst age group right now where everybody's just like in their prime. So I have to like battle all that. It's funny, I was talking to somebody a while ago and I'm like, whenever I look at the results from a race now, I don't look at the overall rankings. I don't even look at the age group rankings, and I'm like, was I the fastest dad in this race? Like that is all that matters to me at this point. I'm like, which of the other guys have kids ahead of me? And if I'm the first place dad in the race, then I consider that like a major win.
yeah. I was fortunate enough. I had a great track coach in Australia for many years, and then I moved across and started to one coach myself and coach a bunch of athletes as well. But he ran as a sprinter until his early 70s,
Wow.
still track and still running 400. He can still run sub 60 seconds, I think at about 69 or 68.
I don't think
He
I've
he
ever
became
broken 60 in a 400 before.
it, he ran low 50s like
Wow.
so late in his life it was crazy, but he became the most successful masters track athlete in the world. He
Hmm.
won more world medals than any athlete. I think he's been surpassed now, but it was just longevity. He just was in the sport for such a long time, and
Hmm.
he did everything right for his health and fitness just to maintain. And I still believe now, I don't have a lot of contact with him, but someone said to me the other week, he must be nearly 80 now. He stopped running track because of his knees, but he's taking up competitive online cycling. He just can't help himself. He needs to
Oh, like
do something.
On
On
Zwift or
Zwift,
something like
yes.
that. Yeah. No,
So,
that's fun.
yes.
Yeah. That's cool.
So I
I love
think I
seeing things
reached
like
out to
that.
you.
It gives us
Yes,
hope.
I know, right? I think I reached out to you about Zwift. I'm thinking about buying one of those new Zwift ride bikes
Mm-hmm.
uh, just to build my base. What I'm finding at the moment is my own running. I run 4 days a week, and we might do a bit of critiquing of my own training program. But I just feel like I can't do the amount of volume that I want to do. I just get continuously sore, just quad
Mm-hmm.
soreness. Overall, my body copes. I'm not getting any injuries, but I'm just heavy legs all the time. So, what's your typical training week look like at the moment, running for the marathon or training for the marathon?
Yeah, so right now, my training it differs a lot from what it used to, when I was in college and whatever, running just 7 days a week. I never cross trained before, but like I mentioned, I've encountered some injuries in the past 5 years or so that have just caused me to kind of shift like how I approach training. And I've always enjoyed doing a lot of just volume. I like to train a lot, and so I've tried to establish a training routine that still allows me to do that without getting injured. And that involves less running, but it involves a lot of cycling. So I actually, like you, I run 4 days a week right now. So I run on Tuesday, Wednesday, or no, what do I do? Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then I do a Friday, Saturday run. So I'm only running 4 days a week. Tuesday is typically like a 12 to 13 mile easier run. Thursday is a workout day, so I'll do some sort of intervals on that day. That could range, depends what I'm doing. Right now, I'm doing a lot of longer intervals, so like 2 mile, 3 mile intervals to kind of prepare for the marathon. So like very marathon specific work there. I also run twice on Thursdays, so I'll do the workout in the morning and then I'll run again in the afternoon, like for 30 to 40 minutes. And then on the weekend, I just do, I'm actually running, yeah, so I run Friday. That's typically another 12 to 13 mile run. And then on Sunday, I do a long run, which right now is 20 miles. Will probably increase to about maybe 24 ish miles in like the peak before the marathon. So 4 days a week. Um, 2 of those days run back to back on Thursday and Friday, but then every other run day has at least one day of cycling in between them. So I'm working out 7 days a week, but typically it's a run, cycle, on and off. There are 2 days of the week where I run 2 days in a row. So basically, most run days followed by a day of cycling. I found that works really well for me in terms of helps promote recovery a lot. Um, you kind of mentioned that constant feeling of soreness. If you do a really hard workout, even me now, I'm feeling sore, but cycling the day after a run really helps just kind of uh, flush out that soreness, for lack of a better word. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
great word. You're not really flushing anything out, but just loosening out the legs. Sometimes I do a higher intensity bike on like Zwift or something like that. But again, you just don't get the pounding on that you do from running. You might get the cardiovascular kind of fatigue and things like that, your nervous system, but sometimes I'll do some higher intensity on the Zwift. Mostly it's just like easy zone 2 riding though. So that Zwift kind of takes the place of like a easy 10 to 15 mile run essentially. When I bike, I typically do 100 minutes to 120 minutes, so an hour 40 to 2 hours most days. So yeah, that's what my training schedule looks like right now. The mileage is pretty somewhat high. It's between 60 and 65 miles of running every single week. And so kind of my focus right now, and that was like this experiment in this training cycle, was focus on density of the runs instead of running 6 or 7 days a week. So I'm only running 4 days a week, but I mean, I'm averaging on my days that I do run, 15 to 17 miles per day on those days. So I think that this will be a neat way to see. I think it builds up kind of that marathon specific strength. Your legs are just going to be able to handle a lot of mileage. So, whereas I'm not running 80 to 90 miles a week like most marathoners of my caliber probably are, I'm still getting those 4 days where I'm running a lot in each of those days. And I kind of have enjoyed it. Something else about the cross training and the biking that I find interesting and that I think people could probably embrace, a lot of runners like myself who have never cross trained a lot before, is that when you're only running 4 days a week, like I really look forward to those days when I'm going to run because I'm not doing it every day. I would like to run every single day, but I'm not. So like when I do my bike on Monday, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to run on Tuesday. And then when I ride my bike on Wednesday, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to bike on Thursday. So it kind of takes away from that, when you're in heavy training and doing 7 days a week, whatever, it can just get real tiring sometimes. You wake up, you're like, man, I got to go out for another run. But this alternating it kind of adds a little bit of spice to it, and it switches things up, which I've been enjoying lately.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of good points there, and I'm definitely that part of my career because I've been, you get into your 50s, and I've been going for, I don't know, I've lost count of the years. I started probably pretty serious training when I was about 13, so it's
Mhm.
quite a long time. And although I've got back into a little bit more distance running, and I'm only 4 days a week, nowhere near your volume, I really look forward to it. But I'm just trying to find, and I think I need to increase my cycling as well, just to get that little bit more volume in my week to just give me that bit of a bump. But I'm finding it, I just can't do it with running. I just pull up too sore. I do quite heavy weight training days in between, and we'll get on to high rocks in a moment because I'd like to pick your brain about that. But yeah, so it's I think that's one thing I'd like to try as well. But I also think, and from my experience with coaching, there's no set way for every individual person. I mean, so many people can perform so well off different training programs, and often you look at it and say, well, how do they do that? Well, it just works for their body. One of my longtime friends and one of the guys I coached, he's 57 at the moment, and he ran 53.5 or something this year for a 400
Wow.
at 57. Yeah, he was ranked second or third in the world at his age. And his training is quite unconventional. He's cut so much volume out of his training because his body just wouldn't cope with it compared to what we used to do. And he does no absolute speed work. And when we used to run together, we would always do some, quite aggressive speed, not too much as for the older athletes. But he said just to keep his body healthy, he's cut all that out. He does very, very light, high rep weight training. We still always do and he's just modified his training, and he's got older, and he's still running extremely well. He doesn't have the sprint background that I had, so he hasn't had the volume on the track. He's catching up now, but so I think different things work for different people. But the cycling's interesting. I'm hearing more and more people that are endurance runners using cycling during the week and getting good results. So it's an interesting sort of take.
Yeah,
You
it's
said
I mean
before,
it's good to see them doing it too, and I just think that it's like myself, it just takes doing it a little bit and it working to then like kind of trust in the process. You got to get away from the idea that like, oh, I just need to run to get better at running. Like, sure, you do have to run a decent amount, especially when you're getting to the marathon distance and beyond. Like, there's a certain point where you just have to run more miles if you want to get better. But it's a great replacement for volume. I mean, by no means could I think I run. Do I think I could run 6 more hours per week compared to what I'm doing right now? But I can cycle for 6 more hours on top of those 4 days that I'm running, which I think is certainly a good trade off. And it's not an exact one for one exchange, but I feel like that is the equivalent of say, 90 to 100 miles per week of running in my mind, kind of at least in the like aerobic stimulus that you're getting.
yeah, sure. Well, it'd be interesting to see how you go. You've been able to maintain your speed, obviously, just with the actual running you're doing. So you mentioned there on I think the Thursday you do a double session.
Yeah.
Um,
So in the morning, I'll work out 13, 14 miles total. And then the evening, 4 or 5 mile run, try to get like 20 miles in that day.
and are they both like zone 2 runs, or are they both sort of, slower runs, or are they mixed up? What's the difference in those two runs?
The evening workout, or I'll call it afternoon workout, that's typically just an easy run. So like you would consider it to be a zone 2 intensity. The morning one, there was a workout where I'm doing intervals. I'm doing a warm up and a cool down, just your typical warm up, cool down, interval workout with recovery intervals in between. I have been playing around though in this training block lately with the idea of a double threshold training session. I don't want to do them too much, but about once a month I've been putting one in there just to kind of see how they work. So like for instance, yesterday, that's what I decided to do. So I had in the morning, I did half-mile repeats. And then in the evening, I went out for a 4 mile run, but every other half mile I ran at a threshold intensity. So I got another, say, 2 miles in of running at, around my goal marathon race pace or something like that. So instead of just doing an easy run, I did a little bit of a harder run. I think you can overdo those. You can certainly risk overtraining or injury if you do those too often, but I've kind of got excited about that idea lately and have been integrating those in just about once per month, just to kind of see how I
Yeah,
respond to that.
I have to say, if I was 20 years younger and my body would cope with it, I would do it as well. one, I like the interval. It's probably my favorite session of the week is my interval runs. My favorite session right now is 10 800s. With a 90-second rest at it's probably more like my 5 kilometer sort of target race pace. So that's my favorite session. So when you do your double session on the Thursday, what time is your run on the Friday?
The Friday run is usually sometime in the morning, so it's a hard turnaround.
Yeah, so
Typically,
you're doing a lot of
yeah.
volume in a very
The
short period of time,
Yeah,
right?
so yeah, you're fitting in within 24 hours, actual 24 hours. Say from 8 a.m. on Friday to 8 a.m. or 8 a.m. on Thursday to 8 a.m. on Friday of this week's. I got in 33 miles because I ran 20 miles yesterday, 13 today. In the morning, I ran 13 in the morning today. So yeah, you're squeezing in a lot of volume in a 24-hour period. The Friday run just always sucks. I always dread it. I'm like, I just want to get this over with, and then I get my bike day tomorrow. And obviously, I could take a day off after my workout day, but just the way my schedule works, and with my wife's training schedule as well, it just works for me to run on a Friday instead of the Saturday. So yeah, it's a very heavy volume, like 24 hours, which I think is a good stimulus, and then you get to recover after that. But yeah, it's always like, the Friday run's just gonna kind of be a slog, a slog most of the time.
Yeah, for sure. What's the weather like in Austin at the moment?
Very hot. So
Is it?
we've
Yeah.
had it's been mid 90s for probably the past 2 months. That's like, in the heat of the day, mid 90s, and then it doesn't really get below 75. So you either get to run in the morning when it's 75 or 80 degrees and 100% humidity, or you can wait till, and I'm Fahrenheit, obviously, I know you may be
Yeah.
measuring degrees in Celsius, but or wait till the afternoon a little bit later and you might get 90 degrees, but it's a little bit drier. So yeah, it's been tough, and I'm almost over. I'm ready for kind of the summer training to be over. I love training in the heat, but it can certainly take a toll, and it makes you feel a little bit less fit than you actually are.
Yeah, for sure.
What's
Are
the
you
weather like where you're at?
finding the weather's actually really nice at the moment? We're just starting to bump up a little bit. I can only speak in. I can convert some temperatures to Fahrenheit for you, but majority of the time I can't. So we're 10 degrees in the morning Celsius at the moment, but we're getting up to around the mid or sort of low 20s at the moment. It's the
Okay,
perfect time of the year right now.
nice.
It's lighter in the morning, so it's light at 5:30, and the
Mm,
weather's perfect for running. And I'm fortunate enough, I live in the city, so I run around the Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge and stuff in the morning. And like everywhere around the
beautiful.
world, running has absolutely exploded in Australia. I go out in the morning and there is so many people running. And we just had the Sydney Marathon last weekend, which I was away. It was downtown. They run past my building where I live, and they had record numbers of people. I didn't see what the finishing time was actually, but I had a few friends do it. But they had record numbers. And then the following day or 2 days later, I went for a run, and there was so many people running around the city with their bibs on, but they're all
Mm,
international. I met one guy running. He's from Mexico City. He flew in just for the marathon. So it's becoming quite popular. What I didn't realize, he was saying there must be some point system because he came out here he has to run X amount of marathons to qualify for some other marathon. I don't know how it works at the moment,
hmm.
but
Yeah, I'm not
he
sure what that
came to
might
Australia to
be,
run the
but
marathon.
yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with what that point system might be, but he might have been trying to qualify for another race or something like that, or yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, some championship. He said you've got to run X amount of races to get into some championship category.
Okay.
But he's coming from Mexico City, so he probably enjoyed the bump and altitude training, right?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
But yeah, regarding the popularity of running, I agree, and I see it here as well. It's just everybody seems to be like training for a marathon. And like Austin's a pretty big running city. So I mean, if I, go down to run, we have a great loop that goes around one of the local lakes in town. It's 10 miles long. If you go down there on the weekend and you just see, there are hundreds and hundreds of people just running. And it's fun. It's fun to be surrounded by people running, and we have lots of run groups here. So it's cool to see the popularity of it. And that's reflected in the how hard it is to get into some of these major marathons these days. Like, I mean, Boston had a record number of applicants to the Boston Marathon this year. Like, I have myself and a group of buddies. We're all trying to try ran a marathon to qualify for Boston to try to run it together next year, and we all have like a time that will probably get us in. But like the cutoff times just keep getting lower and lower and lower. So people are getting more competitive, I think.
Yeah, it's exploded at the moment. It's kind of crazy the amount of people running. And as I said, I've got a few friends that have never been runners before, and they've just decided to start running. And one of them, I can't believe just how well some of them are running. With no real sporting backgrounds. And one of my buddies who, they're not running crazy times, but they're sort of running low 3 hours. But it's nearly like they've found their bit of a calling. They've never participated in sport. He's in his early 40s. And he's got quite a big corporate job, and he's just, plodded away with running. And he runs virtually every day or every other day. He's joined a running group, and he's absolutely loving it, he said. So it's good to see that as well.
Absolutely. No, I have a friend who's the same. He played football in high school and then started running after college. And, he's like almost sub 17 minutes in the 5K. He's run a 2:52 marathon. So like he has like this undiscovered talent that he's now like just enjoying. And it's so fun to see.
Yeah, and it gives you a real hope about it. That's my goal, by the way. I really want to break 20 minutes for 5Ks. That's my first box to tick. I've done it multiple times when I was younger, but then moving into the track space and just running 400s, I'm strong at the moment. I think I can probably run about 22 and a half at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a bit of a ways to go, but I'm getting there. And look, in the back of my mind, there's part of me I would like to run a marathon. I'm just not too sure that I will be able to. We'll see. But that's why I'm really interested in getting I think I'm going to buy one of these Zwift rides and just set it up at home just to get more miles in. They look kind of cool.
They do look cool. Yeah, if you get one, I'd like a review because I think I'm going to bite the bullet and buy one as well.
Yeah. So what are you set up on home at the moment? What do you have?
I just use my road bike and I hook it up to a Wahoo kicker.
Yes, yeah, I had a mountain bike and a road bike up in Colorado, and I had it on a Garmin Flux, and I did all my training when I did the Leadville 50. I was sitting having a coffee with a buddy one day. I have no endurance background, and he's sitting there on his phone. He said, "Oh, there's 10 entries left in the Leadville 50," and he enters me into it. He's like, "Let's just go and do it." And he's got an incredible endurance background. He used to go and just run 40. 22 miles up in the mountains, just plod away, I'm just going for a run. We live at 2,500 meters and he'd come back 4 hours later. It was a good challenge, but I had to do virtually all the training indoors because it was in the winter. And then I got a bit outdoors to get some of the training to my legs, but that's a very, very tough event. The climbing in that event I had to walk for, I think total walk time was 90 minutes. Like 18% on gravel, and everyone's walking. I mean, even some of the best athletes are still walking up there. It's so steep and it's so loose and slippery, you just can't climb it.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I won't keep you too much longer, but a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with High Rocks?
I am actually not intimately familiar with it, but it's funny. Like, I think a month ago or something, my wife and I were just laying in bed and she pulled up a High Rocks video on YouTube. She's like, "Have you seen this competition?" And so we were for like 30 minutes just watching the High Rocks competitions, and I found it to be very interesting, but that's kind of the extent of my knowledge about it.
Yeah, so I want to pick your brain a little bit. I've done one. I'm probably going to do another one this year. I've started to write a bit of a newsletter about High Rocks, just very simplistically just trying to help because it's just exploding. It's grown so fast. It's been around 4 or 5 years. I think the first year they had 70,000 competitors. Now you can't get into an event. They're selling out like rock concerts in 24 hours. I think 500,000 globally competed now. They're doubling up. They're having extended weekends. It hasn't really blown up in the US yet because it started in Germany, and that's had it's really in Europe. We had 4 events in Australia this year in each major capital, and they've now just coming back to do another Melbourne event. But it's interesting it's 8 workout stations with a 1 kilometre run between each station. So it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, and a lot of running. I was surprised by the amount of running in it where I was like, oh, I might actually be decent at this. I mean, you run 8K total, which is a lot.
It's all about the running first and foremost. And then at the elite level, it's, some of the guys are becoming pretty crazy. Like there's some pretty good athletes at the very top of it at the moment. There's an elite 15. And they're now and no one's worked out the training protocol yet because it's still so new. And no, I think as we see the sport grow further, we're going to see some interesting athletes with interesting backgrounds come into it and do extremely well. maybe, for example, cross-country skiers, some really good cyclists that have the strength, the leg strength, because I've interviewed a couple of athletes in the elite, and they're saying to me, some of them have very good compromised running ability, so they can run on really heavy legs.
Right.
And one of the girls I interviewed, she was in the top 15. She may have just fallen out. She comes from a track running background and a 3K sort of background, and she was saying that she does extremely well at the running, but the compromised running after she's pushed the sled, she finds it really difficult.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing to train for. And I have to say, for me personally, the two things that got me the most was you have to do 80 meters of a burpee with a broad jump, and then get up and run a kilometer straight away. I mean, my heart rate was, if my watch is accurate, my heart rate went to 200.
No kidding. Oh, that'll do it. Yeah. Oh man, that's crazy.
Yeah, I shouldn't be allowed to go to 200, Brady. I'm 50, in my 50s.
Yeah, I'm impressed that it went that high, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if my watch is that accurate. I think it was having a conniption. I think my watch was melting down.
It might. Do you know what your max heart rate is, like, officially?
I actually don't. Look, if my Garmin watch has any accuracy to it, and I'd say it's probably around that, it sits at around 185.
Yeah, which is, I mean, still even pretty high. I mean, that's what mine is. Mine's 186, and I'm 20 years younger than you, so. Which is just funny. Everybody's max heart rates are different, but yeah, I think with the High Rocks, I was watching it, and you always watch it with a little bit of naivety, like, oh, I could be so good at that. And I think that, like you said, there are one or two of those events that would get me. I was watching some of them, like, okay, I could probably do that. Okay, the ski erg or something like that, I could probably do, but there are like 2 or 3 of those where they would just completely obliterate me. Just because right now I'm not training for it, that require like a certain amount of strength that, like, as an endurance runner, I might just not have. So, but it was interesting to watch. And I was like, I think it would be fun to train for one of these. I certainly wouldn't know how to do it, but I think it would be fun to try to experiment with all these different, ways to train for it.
Yeah. Sorry about me going a bit dark. The sun's just coming out and it's actually making my camera go down. It's definitely as a running background first. There's a particular runner, and I think he's German or Italian, and he's built like a runner. He's very tall and he's very sort of gangly. He's already in the top 15 in the world, but in his first or second event, the sled push, I mean, I can push they push a little bit heavier weight than me, but I can sort of get the sled push over and done with about 3.5 minutes. He took something like 8 minutes, because the sled push for the elites, if you were to compete, you'd be in the open. I think it's 140 kilos total weight.
Oh, wow.
And it's 50 meters. You got to push the sled.
So that's, 140 kilos. That's, probably double what he weighs. He's pushing twice his body weight.
Yes,
like
he does. He only weighs
70 kilos.
He only weighs 65 kilos. Yeah. So
yeah, that's where
it's interesting to look at It's interesting to look at the athlete. So the guy that was the world champion, he sort of walks around at around 200 pounds, and he's 6'2". He dropped weight to actually compete in that, but he's definitely a bigger guy. There's an Aussie guy in the top 15, John Wynn, that I've interviewed. He's a really nice guy. He's got a military background. He was SAS for Australia, so he's just pure hardcore grit. I mean, he's unstoppable. And he had he was an alcoholic as well. Now he's been sober for 4 years. And he's completely said, this has replaced my problems in life. He said, I've just found the thing to actually get me back on track. But he is 6 foot and weighs 82 kilos. And I think that's about the optimum size and build, because he can still run, but he's still got the strength to push the weights around.
Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like a 6, if you're a guy, say, who's 6 feet, something like, you said, 80 kilos, so 170, 180 pounds, maybe, probably even 180 might be even better, because it's like that strength to weight ratio that you kind of have to optimize. 200 pounds, you're going to be too heavy to run fast. 150 pounds, somebody like me, you're going to be able to run fast as hell, but the body weight stuff, if it's twice or more your body weight, it's just going to kill you. So that's kind of what's fun, is like finding that balance. But yeah, that, if you're 80, 90 kilos, something like that, I think that would be the ideal range, obviously depending on your height. But
yeah, it's interesting that the guy that actually has holds the world record, he can still hold the kilometre runs between each station at 3:15 or 3:20.
Yeah, that's quick.
It's quick. So he says, I think he runs a 10K in 31 or 32
Mm-hmm.
at, in 190 plus pounds.
Yeah, that's
So,
impressive.
yeah, he's a big athlete. But there's one coming up in Austin soon. I think the next one is actually in Austin.
Oh, is that right? Cool. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, I'm sure it's sold out. Maybe I'll look in. I could enter
Do you
like
know
the
who
female
Nick Bear
division.
is? I think he's Austin as well.
Yeah, I know Nick. I don't know Nick personally, but I know of him. Yeah, he
Oh,
seems like
yes.
he would be killer at that sport.
So he's training for it at the moment. He's put
Oh,
himself out
cool.
there to say he's competing for the next one. All right, we'll get through a couple of questions I've got for you. Supplements. I don't know if you're a big supplement person, but I'm just interested in pick your brain. I saw you tweeted something about David bars.
Yeah, supplements. So, I guess I'll talk about the David bars first, then I can maybe talk about some supplements that I do take. It's not a long list, but I do take some. The David bars are interesting. Again, I have no affiliation with those, and I don't know if you've tried them yet, but
I
I
haven't.
don't
I
know.
haven't seen them in Australia yet.
I don't know too much about them. They just got released, but it's like it's a protein bar. There are plenty of protein bars out there. Protein bars aren't new, but I guess they're like this. The unique thing about them, they have I think 28 grams of protein per bar and 150 calories, which is a very like high protein to calorie like ratio, and that's kind of the idea I guess behind this bar. They were getting a lot of pushback because the ingredients weren't necessarily the cleanest. It was kind of filled with some artificial sweeteners and like binders and things like that. But I think they've responded to that well, just by saying like that's not really the goal of the bar. The bar is to give you as much protein and as few calories as possible and make it taste good, which it does. I tried some and I thought it was nice. I'd buy them to eat on occasion, but I wouldn't make it part of like probably my regular routine. I get plenty of protein from other sources. So, but yeah, they're good. If people want to try them, sure. They were kind of expensive. I think it was $40 for like a 12 pack. So they're not cheap bars, but
Yeah, and US, like
um,
in the Aussie dollar, we're only 60 something cents to your dollar.
got
So
it. Yeah,
that becomes expensive. But I must
yeah.
admit, I'm always looking for reasonable protein bars that are
Hmm.
somewhat clean and give you a bit more sort of bump in protein. Like everybody, I mean, I still get quite a lot of protein in, but I still struggle with it. And I run pretty lean as a person. I'm that classic, I'm just under 6 foot and I weigh 80 kilos, so about
Hmm.
176. But as I get older, I do struggle to keep my muscle on, just like everyone. And with the running, it's starting to fall off me. So I'm always looking for something in a bar that's pretty clean because most of the bars are just rubbish. They're just so full of crap. Drives me
Yeah,
insane.
yeah, totally. And I mean, I looked at the ingredients. They really weren't too bad. I mean, I was fine eating them. I didn't look at the ingredient list and like think, "Oh, this is like terrible. I'm not going to eat it." Like it was considered cleaner, I think, than a lot of things I've seen. So yeah, I would give them a shot. I mean, they taste good enough and it'd be a good thing like they have chocolate fudge ones. It's like you basically have that as your dessert after dinner or something and you get an
Yeah.
extra 30 grams of protein and not a ton of
Right. Yeah.
calories. So it's a very good, it's a very utilitarian type of thing and they definitely tasted good. Regarding other supplements though, so I've recently started doing whey protein every day. So, to keep on the topic of protein, I basically have been doing a smoothie every day for breakfast. I put 25 grams of whey protein in there, which I've enjoyed doing. Again, just kind of a way to get some extra protein. I'm not a huge breakfast eater, and I like to do a smoothie for breakfast instead, especially in the summer. I find that like if I work out in the morning, I have no appetite until lunch, so that smoothie kind of gets me there. So I'll put whey protein in there. So that's kind of the protein supplement that I take. I've been taking creatine lately as well. That's kind of a huge one that I think everyone probably should be taking if you tolerate it well. There are just like a ton of benefits there. I'll do 5 grams per day of creatine. Um, I do vitamin D every day, 4,000 IU of vitamin D. I take fish oil supplement. I couldn't tell you the dose of that, but I think it's I don't know, maybe 2 grams of EPA and DHA fish oil. And I think that's it. I do ashwagandha as well. That's something I've recently started doing. I don't know if you've heard much about
Don't
ashwagandha.
know what that is.
It's
No.
they call it an adaptogen. So it's kind of supposed to help with like stress modulation and things like that. Some studies showing that it helps with sleep. I've enjoyed taking it. I haven't noticed any adverse side effects. And I do, it's hard to tell whether things work. I'm sure you take supplements yourself, maybe you're odd, and like it's hard to say like if what is this just a placebo effect or am I actually getting a benefit from it? In my eyes, I feel great lately and I'm taking it. I don't feel any negative side effects. So in my mind, I'm going to keep taking something if that's kind of how it works out to be. So at the very least, I'm like maybe, spending a few extra bucks per month to take something that doesn't work. So that's kind of what's in my supplement cabinet. Kind of the basics, things that have a decent amount of evidence behind them. I don't take, a ton of stuff, but it's probably more supplements maybe than
It's
the
very similar
average
to my
person
stack.
takes. Yeah.
My stack at the moment as well. I've taken vitamin D and creatine for years. I started to take creatine many, many, many years ago before it was popular. And it was the one thing that I did find always gave me a bump, in particularly in muscle mass for me personally. What about caffeine? Are you a caffeine fan?
Oh yeah, I know. It's kind of weird when people ask about supplements. I don't
It's not a
ever.
supplement. I
Yeah,
agree, but
it is, but it's like not. But yeah, I drink coffee every
be-
day. That's my
yeah,
only source
because
of.
it's just
Right. Yeah, I know. It's funny. It's like, do you do drugs? Well, no. What do you take caffeine? Yes. um, I do caffeine, and honestly, I consider myself a big coffee drinker, but on most days, it's probably not that much. I mean, I make myself a pot of coffee in the morning, and I drink maybe half of a cup before I go out for my run. It's probably 100 to 150 milligrams of caffeine, uh, 200 at the most in the morning, and then if I have leftovers, I'll have a cup after my run. So I'm probably around 300 milligrams a day. Of course, there are days where like I'll make coffee at home and then I'll go to a coffee shop in the afternoon to work and I might have 400 milligrams because I'll get a very strong espresso or like a cold brew coffee. And but on most days, I mean, probably 300 milligrams. And I try to keep it to earlier in the day. I'll have a Diet Coke, most days too, which has like 50 milligrams, but I can drink that right before I go to sleep and has no effect on me.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm the jury's still out for me with coffee. I drink predominantly my coffee in the morning and
mhm.
into the afternoon, not too late. I think it's interesting. Now, living in the US, I got into the habit of making the pot of coffee in the morning as well. But in Australia, I have a proper coffee machine at home.
Mhm, mhm,
So I have two double espressos in the morning with some hot water added to them. We call that a long black. You guys call it Americano.
mhm.
Now, long black would be stronger than your Americano, though. But yeah, so but I got used to the whole pot of coffee, put the pot on and sort of drink coffee all morning at home in the
Mhm.
US. And um, at the time, I remember my girlfriend over there, she'd turn up and, these giant sort of thermos full of coffee. And I'm like, if that was coffee in Australia, one, we would never have that volume of coffee because you couldn't drink it all because it's so strong. But yeah, that's interesting. But I'm a massive coffee fan. I just think I don't know if I get massive stimulus out of it. I do think in the afternoons if I need a bit of a pick me up, but I also just love it in the morning
Yeah, I enjoy
when I
it.
get
I
up.
enjoy it as well. And aside from the caffeine, there appears to be some pretty good health benefits behind it. Like, I mean, there's every week you see like a new study. Oh, coffee lowers the risk for cardiovascular disease. And obviously, that's kind of like, is this just like people who drink coffee have other healthier habits or whatnot? But at the very least, like drinking coffee seems to be good for health for some reason. It's got antioxidants in it. It's polyphenols and I think caffeine isn't necessarily bad for us either unless we drink way too much of it. So yeah, it's a great drink. You just drink yours
Yeah,
black,
yeah, yeah. That's
no
my
cream or
point as well.
sugar.
Like, is
Yeah,
it? No, no, no cream or sugar. No, 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 nothing.
no, me neither.
That's my point as well. There's no downside with it. So, um,
Certainly not.
I was going to ask you just quickly about your sort of gel intake or your supplement intake when you're in a race.
Yeah, I in a race and also in training, I've actually started using them more, which has I've seen a huge benefit to. Like maybe like most runners out there, I think, or maybe unlike most, but I was never like a huge user of fuel or gels or anything during my runs, and I've wisened up in my older years and actually realized that it could have like a huge benefit. So, um, for for a race, I mean, if it's unless it's over a half marathon distance or above, I probably won't take a gel. For a 10K or a 5K, I'll take a gel beforehand just as a little kind of pick me up type of thing to just have something in my system. But say like for a marathon, for an example, in my first one, I targeted just a gel every 30 minutes, which would be 25 grams of carbs every 30 minutes or 50 grams an hour. That's kind of on the low end. And I think for this next marathon, I'm going to try to up that a little bit and probably try to take a gel every 3 miles, maybe. So every 15 to, I guess, more like 20 minutes, maybe. So try to get like 75 maybe grams of carbs per hour, which would be a fun experiment to run. I think that like uh, there are a lot of benefits, at least runners are saying anecdotally, to kind of upping their carbohydrate intake. So I'm curious to try to experiment with that. You do, run the risk of GI distress kind of when you're taking in a little bit more carbs during a race or something, but I tend to tolerate them pretty well. And there are a lot of good products out there. So that's kind of my strategy. If I'm on a long run as well, that's kind of what my protocol is. Take a gel every 30 minutes. That ends up being about, like, I said, 50 grams of carbs or something like that per hour. But again, that's for a long run where I'm kind of low intensity. It's not during a race. So for a race where
Sure.
you're running a bit harder, I think maybe doing 3 per hour could be beneficial. And so that's kind of what I'm going to try for the next go around.
Yeah, I haven't really taken any gels. I'm not running that far. A couple of times on my 10K runs or 12K runs, I've felt like I really should take something out with me because I am getting that bit of a, just I could do with a little bit of a pick me up. I used when I rode a lot in the US up in the mountains, I used those little stingers all the time, just the little tubes. And I found those for me personally really good. I actually don't like the taste of these gels. I really struggle with them. I was just interested, what brand are you using at the moment, just out of interest?
So the brand I like right now, I've actually always just liked the Goo brand of energy gels, GU.
Mm-hmm.
I I know some people are very averse to that taste. I've kind of always liked them. I mean, I like the fruit flavors. I get a fruit flavor of them. I kind of enjoy it. I also use the Morton gels, but those don't have a flavor. They're kind of just like glucose. But I find those to be very effective. I kind of reserve those for race day because I feel like they're
Mm-hmm.
very. I'm like, I don't want anything that tastes. I just want something that I like slug and it's gonna get in my system and give me the energy and the caffeine that I need. They have one of them with 100 milligrams of caffeine in it as well, so that one's kind of nice as well. But the goos are good, and they actually make, and maybe something, if you get into marathon running or whatever, you might want to try. My wife found, because she's training for a marathon right now as well, but they make what's called a liquid energy product. So it's in a bigger package, but it's essentially, it has the consistency of almost water. So I found these packets, they're a lemonade flavor, and you just kind of squeeze it in your mouth. It's like 5 ounces of water almost, but it's very, strong and sugary. So same carbs, same calories as a gel, but it's not in the gel form, it's in
Interesting.
a liquid form. And I really, really like those. So those are what I've been using. I'll try different stuff every now and then. They have like a chia based energy gel that I've tried from a brand called Huma. It's a more like all natural kind of one, and those actually taste pretty good as well. But that's kind of the goo is I've always stuck with it. They sit well in my stomach. I like the taste and they do the
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
So that's kind of what I've been using. But so many sports nutrition products out there right now, which is like, you said you don't like gels, you like the little chews or whatever, but like there's got to be something out there that you like, because if you go on the website called The Feed, which I've been shopping on lately to find my sports nutrition products, there's just so much stuff. And I think there's something for everybody that will sit well in your stomach, that will taste good, and it's kind of fun to experiment with all these different
Yeah, I have to
products.
get into a little bit more. I don't tend to have
Hmm.
any gut problems, so I can actually pretty much eat anything. But I
Yeah,
just
well, that's
haven't found
good
sort of
to have a
those.
strong stomach, because there are some runners who like
Yeah,
can't tolerate anything, and you can train that ability somewhat, which I'm trying to do a little bit more, which I'll probably have to do if I want to try to do 3 or 4 gels per hour. But yeah, you can train up to it. But yeah, there are some runners who just don't have a strong stomach, so that's kind of a blessing to have that.
yeah. I read about those Norwegian athletes. They're taking like 130 grams of carbohydrate per hour, I think.
It's crazy. On a bike, I
It's
can almost
crazy.
understand it though, but not running. I mean, on a bike,
On
it
a
makes
bike is
sense that
different.
you might be able to do it because you don't get the gut. You're not jostling your stomach around like you are on running. But still,
Hmm.
120 per hour is, I mean, you're just like constantly almost just sucking down a gel or a sports drink.
Unless the concentration of the
I guess that's the
carbohydrate is
thing. You
really
just,
high.
yeah, you just really increase the concentration, I guess, would be, yeah, another way to do that. So, but yeah, they're
Yeah, I
pushing the
think they're
limits and
developing.
athletes are getting better. So maybe it's working.
Yeah, they've been developing their own product, I believe, with the company, actually
Mm.
just for them, just what they can tolerate.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
we'll quickly wrap up, but I have got to ask your favorite running shoes.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. I think when it comes to racing, the Nike Alpha Fly Next Percent 2 is my favorite. They no longer make them. I mean, you could find them online somewhere like eBay or whatever, but so those have been my favorites. I'm going to be sad when the pair I have uh, is no longer kind of bouncy and I have to buy a new pair. But the Nike Alpha Fly, that's my favorite shoe to race in. My favorite training shoes right now, I would say I have two, three that I alternate, and these are kind of my three favorites that I've probably tried in the last few recent years. But Asics, the Nova Blast, that's a very kind of solid day to day trainer. The Nike Invincible Run 3, that one's a real solid day to day trainer as well. And then New Balance, they make it's a super trainer, so it's kind of got like a carbon plate in there, but it's not a racing shoe; it's like a training shoe. The Super Comp Trainer is also one that I frequently use. So those are kind of my four top ones. I was really impressed though with the Nova Blast. That one is just very comfortable. It feels almost like a super shoe, but it's not. So that's probably been one of my favorite shoes lately. But when it comes to racing, I don't know if I can deviate from Nike. I'm kind of like loyal there. I haven't found a super shoe that feels just as good as those.
Yeah, the Nova Blast, is that the Nova Blast 4? Do they come in different numbers? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I have the 4. Yeah, the most recent
Yeah,
version is the one I'm running in.
that's what I have as well, and I haven't really experimented with too many pairs of shoes. I've got a Brooks pair, but that's my favorite running shoe by far at the moment, that Nova Blast, and I'm thinking about buying the Super Blast,
Me too.
2, whatever it is,
Hmm.
because that Nova Blast just works for my feet, just the shape of my feet, my running so well. So I thought maybe that Super Blast is actually going to be the same, because I bought a pair of the Saucony, whatever they're called, the Speeds or Speed 4s or Speed 2s or something.
Hmm. The endorphin maybe or
And
something like that.
my feet went numb straight away in them. I didn't like them at all. So I think
Sauconys are very narrow, I think, and the Asics are very wide. I don't really necessarily have a wide foot, but it's just they feel more comfortable. The wide toe box, like it feels better, and so yeah, I've those ones are like very super comfortable. I've found.
yeah, I think Saucony have just launched, or Sauconys have just launched a shoe that's got a wider toe box. I think literally in the last couple of weeks. So
Oh, interesting.
awesome. Well, we will wrap up there. But if people want to reach out or follow you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I am primarily active on X, username B_Holmer, HOLMER. And then I also write on Substack. I do a newsletter every week. I also post sometimes more than once a week. I'll do a video or some other piece of content, but that's physiologicallyspeaking.com. And if you go to my X bio or Twitter bio, whatever, you can find a link to that there. But that's pretty much where you can find me. I don't do much on Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. So Twitter and Substack are where I'm primarily posting all my content.
Cool. I'll post a couple of links in the show notes of those as well. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate the making the time in your day to have a quick chat. It's actually, well, quick chat, quite of a long chat, but it's been good. It's actually some interesting topics and some good knowledge and good base sort of information for people.
Yeah, Rod, thanks for the invite. This was a lot of fun.
No problems. Enjoy the rest of your day. Just stay online just for a moment, just while this uploads, but I'll stop it.